The Central Bank of Nigeria on Wednesday night confirmed reports that it has eliminated currency controls, leaving the exchange rates to be determined by market forces. This was confirmed in a statement by the bank's Director of Financial Markets, Angela Sere-Ejembi. She said all transactions will now be done through the investors and exporters window, where the exchange rates will be determined by the market forces, adding that applications for medicals, school fees, BTA and PTA, and SMEs will continue to be processed through deposit money banks. Now, this is in line with President Bola Tinubu's inaugural speech, where he stated his desire to unify the exchange rates in the country. So this morning, joining me to discuss this is Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics. Thank you so much, Gospel, for joining us on Business Edge.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, Lekan.
Now, commercial banks and dealers have been given the free opportunity, or the green light, as it were, to begin to buy and sell Forex on the interbank market. What do you make of this, and what would you say the rationale behind the decision is?
Well, the new president had mentioned in his inaugural address that he's going to unify the markets, and those are parts of the signs, or efforts or policies, or initiatives or engagements we're seeing right now. All right, so markets and policies are responding accordingly, which is largely expected, and we begin to see a lot of different reaction to the context of this unification and how different stakeholders are also reacting or responding to this new policy, and it's a developing story. A lot is going to be unpacked in the coming days or weeks, and it's just going to be a whole lot that's going to be happening going forward.
All right. Well, now that we see this initiative coming into place, you talked about reactions in the market, and we see that the naira has shot up to about 750 naira to a dollar before it closed up to about 664 naira on the IE window. But then some financial experts and economists are said to be surprised, but then have actually welcomed the idea. Now, are you actually bothered about the effect it's having on the naira and the reactionary drop in terms of the value on the currency? Are you perturbed at all?
Well, first and foremost, different stakeholders see this new policy from a different context. Yeah, the international partners, FDI investors, and all those guys are relatively happier because it shows that they can do business and see through what the exchange and impact of the monetary economics looks like. In context of the investment decisions that they're making, they can envisage returns easier. Unification of the market helps to boost investors' confidence because it's a lot more easier. The market is perceived, to be more transparent in its outlook, to a very large extent. So it's a very huge plus for the capital market, the investors' market, the foreign exchange market, and even international development partners who have written many times recently, that the divergence in the official and the parallel and even I window is a big concern. Going forward and pretty much not healthy for the economy. However, real sector players, real sector institutions, the common man, even businesses are taking a different review or a different heat or different effect from the policy because it technically impacts on the bottom line, being also the fact that, like you mentioned, does it impact on the value of a naira? And I try to talk about this a lot. The argument is not really on the floating. The argument is more around how you balance the supply side and demand side of these economics. Because when you talk about equilibrium pricing, that's the middle, the market informed pricing of any currency or whatever it is. It's largely a function of how the demand and supply side work together. All right. One of the major reasons why we've found a devaluation of the currency over the years is because there's a huge demand side pressure on the currency. And we do not have enough supply, number one, to close that gap. Two, we've not been able to properly align all our supply channels, all the IME receipts and all the foreign diaspora remittance and all the supply channels. We've not been able to properly align them and plug them directly into that supply demand economics in context. All right. So we've seen demand always outweigh on supply. Now, does the new policy close that gap automatically? Is a big no. All right. It means that the government still needs to do a lot of work with its unification. I would have preferred that some groundwork goes into closing the supply gaps so that way you can make enough supply available to meet demand, and then introducing some form of internal controls on the demand side again Some people demand for dollars, illegitimately, and have other concerns that may not be ideally required, for the dollars. However, there is a genuine high demand for dollars. Nigeria is still a heavy import-dependent economy. Lots of our exchange and facilitation of production and value processing has to do a lot with exporting first before you import the value add. All right, so that's a lot of pressure on demand in real context. So you want to fix supply side issues and then reevaluate all the demand streams for dollars and then begin to define what unification means in that context. However, that's not the case right now. We've gone ahead to announce and we are unifying already. Okay, so the market is going to have a very huge, harsh, friction-based response to this new narrative. And it depends on where you're sitting on the table, depends on how you're looking at the context again, but to a very large extent, to the critical mass of the economy in terms of businesses, MSMEs, and households, all right, the pressure is going to hit on differently. And again, there are also arguments where analysts and other folks talk about the fact that the value of the naira will find its middle ground. Finding the middle ground is a function of balancing out supply-demand economics. If you do not balance out supply-demand economics, the naira can never find its middle ground. Demand will always outweigh supply, and the prices will keep going up. So regardless of whether you unify or not, you're still dealing with the fundamental monetary economic principle that says that you need a strong supply base to meet up with your demand side. Look at the dollar, for instance, in the United States, or the pounds, and other. There was a strong blend of supply and demand side to retain the value of the currency at a level. All right, so you don't try to jump the gun on conversations like this, but it's a developing story, like I mentioned earlier on.
Well, of course, it's a developing story, and we also need to consider the value of the naira, as you have mentioned, the mechanics around it, because some analysts are speculating that this rate harmonization would have a significant impact on government's debt being paid between the tune of about 12 trillion naira to about 90 trillion naira now. But then on the flip side, it is said that this might likely increase the revenue portfolio of governments. But then what we want to do is to look at it holistically, looking at the advantages and the disadvantages. Now, would you say that it is more advantageous or more disadvantageous with this policy rate, or you would say it is a fair balance? Because, of course, we are considering how to increase the value in terms of the naira and have more value come to the Nigerian currency. But, of course, because we know that it is a legal tender and is the main source for transactions.
Honestly, right now, I won't conclude if it's positive or negative, but I think it still sits on the fence in terms of the blurriness of this policy. And that's because markets, in the coming weeks, we're going to see markets react differently. And the perception of this particular act will impact on pounds and euros and every other bit of things. I agree it may increase government revenue. But then again, also increase government, the size of our debt servicing and all of that, because most of these items are pegged and valuated also in dollars. All right. But the argument of government revenue is still very much relative when you look at it within the larger scheme of what ideally should be our revenue portfolio. All right. Nigeria needs a huge spending drive to unlock its investment potentials and the productivity potentials of lots of the sectors. All right. So we are still lagging. So take for instance now the overall Apple brand, globally, the value of the Apple brand is almost times 10 of the current Nigerian budget revenue. So saying that a unification of the exchange rate will increase revenue size and all that, yes, that may pass. But in the grand scheme of what we should be doing in terms of enabling for development, we need to shift past that argument and begin to find new streams of unlocking that. And for me, again, another reason why it's blurry for me is because we're also looking at how stakeholders in the market will approach this differently. Would there be a holding of the dollars? Would there be an artificial scarcity of the dollars? There are a lot of non-informal market elements that may further, how will I put it, frustrate, that equilibrium idea that the current administration is seeking to achieve with this policy. And those are the big ticket questions, that sort of reinforces the fact that it's a developing story, and we are hoping that government can actually not really control but also influence closure of lots of these leakages on the supply side and a comprehensive review of dollar demand in Nigeria and where can we relax demand, and what can we do? What interventions can be introduced monetarily to close for those demand gaps or those demand excesses, to reduce demand excesses, until there's an alignment on the supply-demand economics. We really can't say if it's a positive or negative.
Okay.
Again, it's positive or negative, depending on where you're sitting on the fence.
Okay, well, let me just digress a bit and talk about the issue where you said the government needs to raise funds in order to invest in the critical sectors of the economy and open it up, as it were, to make it more buoyant. But then I'd like to ask you, for a government that is inheriting humongous debt, an administration, of course, an outgone administration that has gone through a series of economic and global challenges, as it were, and a new government coming into place who may not really have the financial backing to stimulate the economy as it would. Where do you think this administration should get the funds from? How do you think it should source for the funds to be able to plug the sectors of the economy that you've mentioned?
I mean, the default body language, for a new administration like this is to tilt towards the financial markets, the international markets, and rein in policies that would put them in a negotiation position, which is what they're trying to do with this administration. And it actually makes sense. From that angle, it makes sense because you need to find a way to rake in more monies to do what you want to do. So what are the top line conversations that these institutional stakeholders need to have, and all that. So on that part, it checks out positively. However, the most sustainable solution to the value of the currency and enabling all of our locals, at least, is the fact that you need a productive economy. All right. So without a productive base, you cannot enforce or enable a strong currency in the real sense of value exchange relating to other currencies, internationally. So that has to be done. Now, if you take out the productivity of that economy, no matter how many policies you try to bring into the context, you may not still be able to achieve what you want to achieve, because every currency is tied at the end of the day to the level. That's one reason why you cannot separate the real sector and all of the other stakeholder narratives from this particular unification argument. However, to stir up productivity, you need lots of investment. So it makes sense in that context. That this policy makes sense in that context. And the government needs to find more revenue or more funding to do that, all right, both domestically and internationally. So domestically wise, we're going to look out for higher tax rates and probably more regulations or more processes to improve tax compliance. It may not necessarily be to inspire to tax compliance, but it has to be reinforced to sort of improve tax compliance. So there has to be an increased revenue at home, and then internationally, striking the right conversations, appealing to stakeholder interest to rake in the necessary investment. I understand Nigeria has a huge debt situation, but what we've also been able to do is to get some stakeholder buy-in for more negotiations in the future, for more monies from the international market. And that's why this policy is sort of critical to take that conversation forward. So whatever the situation may have looked like now, past administrations, yes, they have borrowed monies that, hasn't been healthy for us contextually. But the truth is that we cannot also finance our infrastructure and productivity needs ourselves in the short term. So how do you strike the deal?
Okay, so quickly, Gospel, let me just quickly take you back a bit. Before now, the Central Bank of Nigeria resisted pressure from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund on floating the naira, but now it is doing that. And some people are speculating or saying that it's more of about a pressure than a policy statement. So is there any tangible credence that we can lend to that particular postulation?
Well, like I mentioned, the narratives or the argument for floating has been one of the most dragged arguments in Nigeria, because again, you have a lot of cards on the table to think of, and it wasn't as though past administration or past stakeholders on the table weren't decisive on it. We just had a situation where there were much more vested interest to consider. And technically, quite truly, you need to forcefully close out all the supply leakages that already exist. Otherwise, if you put a floating of a currency on a very, very misaligned supply-demand engagement, you're going to have that currency tilted more to the demand side pressure, which technically will mean that the value of the currency, sorry, not the value right now, the price of exchange will rise. And that's what's likely to happen. Now, in the current administration sense, what we have is a very decisive president. It may not technically mean that he may have thought things through or strategically have a solution to deal with the problem down to the grassroots of the leakages on the supply side. He's just a very decisive president, which is also very good to rein in investors' confidence. And the argument right now will be, despite being decisive, how do you begin to rework the economics of that price or the economics of that equivalent price? Or how do you ensure that you're raking in enough supply to meet local demand for the dollar? How do you begin to relax demand side pressure to ensure that when the market forces are aligning to a pricing that makes sense, it is not biased to the demand side area, because it cannot be biased now to the supply side. I don't know if you get what I mean. We don't have dollar surplus in Nigeria. You have dollar deficit to start with. And then how are informal, institutional, even formal stakeholders reacting to this policy as well? You have, I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. So you have a situation where people would likely buy dollars and hold. You have a situation where the round tripping will happen. You have a situation where people may not even be able to easily access it because of fear of what this policy would look like for the exchange rate in the coming 3 to 4 months. Let's not forget that we're also dealing in a context where people are culturally reactive to policies. People always, Nigerians to a very large extent, always take action when they don't understand the policy or when communication has not been put in place to help people understand the impact or the need for that policy. And you can't really blame it on them, all right? So there's a risk of artificial scarcity. There's a risk of round tripping. I put those two risks on the table that the government may not be able to successfully trace or manage. Then there's also another risk of increased exchange rate. However, I stand to be corrected, but my own view of the conversation is that for there to be a balancing or even a stabilization of the rates, there has to be fixing of the supply side of this economics.
All right, finally, Gospel, before I let you go, because we've talked about a lot of expectations and the downside to it, but I'd like to know, what do you think with this policy Nigerians should expect more in terms of inflation, a hike in the price of petrol and all that, or increase in terms of Forex inflows and the capital markets? Just in about a minute, your reaction.
Nigerians just need to prepare for what's ahead. That's the only way to respond to all of that. Nigerians just need to prepare for what's ahead. Many of these policies are very good, all right? And if you look at it from the context of what the country needs right now to go forward, a lot of painful trade-offs have to happen. So in as much as they have their upside, they also have their downside. Unfortunately, it looks as though it's a trade-off between the financial markets and the real sector. And when you talk about the real sector, at the core of the real sector are households and consumers, the micro of that economics. So Nigerians need to prepare. However, preparation is still a very broad word in this context. You want to think of what does preparation mean for the average bakery or the average Nigerian who runs a food restaurant or who runs a food business? What does preparation mean for the high corporate? What does preparation mean for the low income earner? What does preparation mean for different stakeholder of consumer blocks in different markets? All right. So it's very relative based on where you're seated on the table and based on the context or reality you're living in. However, the central line of argument is that Nigerians need to prepare. There's going to be much more decision, right on spot decision made by the current administration, again, because there's a lot of pressure to deal. There's a lot of reworking of the reputational loss that happened due to elections and all that. And there's just a lot at stake on the table.
All right, thank you so much, Gospel. I guess if I'm taking out from all you've said, it has to do with educating the stakeholders, having an understanding, a proper understanding of the marketing situation, and of course, the demands, as it were, and finding an equilibrium to the demand and supply gap. And maybe if those holes can be plugged, as it were, we could have some sort of viability in terms of the implementation of this particular policy. But then we appreciate you joining us on the show.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome, Gospel.
Have a good day.
And you too.